Hello, good evening. I'd like to take a minute or two, or three or four, I'm a gabber, to tell you an Appalachian mountain story. This is a picture of our mountain home in the Appalachia. It's been gone for ages. The gentleman you see in the picture right here, he was my great-grandfather. This was my great-grandmother. She taught me how to weave in 1964. And this was our home. This is a picture of my great-grandmother. This was her sister, and this was my great-great-grandmother. Now this story I want to tell you has to do with primarily with my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was an immigrant, came here from Ireland. I'm going to do a little weaving while I'm talking. He came here from Ireland, wound up in the mountains. He actually never really learned to speak English very, very well. He primarily spoke Gaelic, and there's a point to that story, the part about him primarily speaking Gaelic. It was because he had a thing that he called Applecrack. Now, some of you listening to this may say, Applecrack, that sounds a little familiar. Well, it was a product. See, every fall we would go out and we would collect all the winter fallen apples. And honestly, it was the first job I ever had. I was about 3 years old, and I'd go out in the fall with my great-grandfather, excuse me, and we would pick up these winter fallen apples, and we would put them into a big barrel. And this is up in the mountains in Tennessee. And I try to be honest with people. It wasn't heaven on the mountains. It wasn't paradise up there. Times were tough. Things were rough. So you had to make a lot of your own food. And one of the things that they did make was a product that was called Applecrack. And you'd take these apples and you'd put them in a big barrel. And these were not eaten apples. These were apples that fell off of trees, and they're full of worms and bruises and, all kinds of bugs and stuff. And they go in this 55-gallon barrel. And my job, besides picking up the apples off the ground, was to go out every morning before the sun would rise and take the ice off the top of this barrel. And I was just a child. I did as I was told. Children up in the Appalachian Mountains tended to do as they were told. And you'd say, well, how'd you get a kid to get up that early? Well, without, alarm clocks or anybody telling us what to do. Well, we didn't have electricity. So when we were living up in the mountains, you were cold. And by morning time came around, when the sun first started coming up, you were pretty much ready to get out of bed because it was cold. I'm going to add a stitch here, and pay attention to what I'm doing here. You're going to see me adding a stitch. This is how you add a stitch when your stitches get a little too far apart. This is how you do it. You put it there and then you loop it around. So at any rate, my job was to go out in the morning, and my great-grandfather made a thing. He called it a spider. It was an old broom handle that had baling wire wrapped around it. And I would go out there every morning before the sun would come up, and I would take the ice off the top of that barrel. And I never knew why I was doing it, and I never knew why it was called Applecrack. I just knew that's what it was called. I suspect that my great-grandfather heard somebody say Applecrack at some point. That's what he thought he heard, because, again, he didn't speak English, and that's just what we always called it. As I became an adult, I realized that the product that we were making is actually a product that's called Applejack, and it is apple whiskey. And what you do up in these places, again, we didn't have electricity, so we didn't have, things to boil the water off or anything. When you would go out in the morning with your spider, which was, again, a broom handle with baling wire wrapped around it, break the ice and swoop it off the top of that barrel, what you were doing is you were removing the fresh water. You see, fresh water freezes, but alcohol does not. So you were concentrating that product farther and farther until by the time springtime came around, you were left with a product that was called Applecrack. And that's how my first job, I was making booze. And that's the story of Applecrack. And I'll show you one more picture of my great-grandfather. He was a very intelligent, creative man. People of the Appalachians were very, very poor. But they were not I don't know how to word it, but they were proud. They were poor, but they were proud. That's what I want to say. They were poor, but they were proud, and they were resourceful. And that's one of the things with this pine weaving that I always like to mention is I asked my great grandmother, why do you do this? It's a lot of work for a very little product, because it does take a really long time to do this. And the baskets, when they would make them, really didn't even serve they didn't really even serve a purpose. And I asked her, I said, why do you do this? And she said, because they're pretty. I hope that meant something to you. It sure meant something to me. I hope everyone has a good evening, good day, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you.